Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value, a place for thinkers and builders, where together we explore freedom, energy, and creativity through the lens of Bitcoin and long-term thinking. Today I have a very special audio story episode for you, with excerpts from two books about that city on the harbour, Hong Kong, and its contested political struggle, bringing together some intricate soundscapes and field recordings, along with the readings I hope to take you there to feel the inescapable tropical heat bearing down as we watch a city drifting by across the intersection between nostalgia and the uncompromising blunt reality of the state. Hong Kong is a city of cinema, of the image and the performance, but the state is of course incapable of nuance and delicacy, of jest or flirtation, or of any of the things that make for a beautiful story, yet it is ascribed a certain authority with its own art. The police batons and the tear gas and water cannons are the palette of the monopoly on violence that the state holds. My first reading is from a book about the Hong Kong protests of 2019, City on Fire, The Fight for Hong Kong by Anthony Dapiran, published 2020. People had been calling it Hong Kong's Summer of Discontent, and then we reached the last day of summer. The Civil Human Rights Front announced a protest march for Saturday, 31st August, but police refused to grant permission. Protesters said they would march anyway. Then, the night before the proposed march, 2 protest organisers were beaten by thugs and 6 pro-democracy figures were arrested. Joshua Wong and his fellow Demosisto Party member Agnes Chow, 2 Pan-Democrat legislators, 1 district councillor, and Andy Chan, convener of the controversial pro-independence Hong Kong National Party. The anger was palpable by the time the protesters faced off against the police the following afternoon in what was, from the moment it started, an unlawful assembly. Outside the government headquarters in Admiralty, thousands of black-clad protesters with their yellow hard hats and pink filtered glass masks lined up across from the 2-metre-high water-filled police barricades, holding umbrellas and makeshift shields fashioned from planks of plywood and road signs, some poised with orange traffic cones ready to smother the police tear gas canisters. There were cracks and pops as the police guns fired, and a clattering as rounds of tear gas shells bounced off the umbrellas and shields of the protesters at the front lines. The protesters began to creep their way forward under the shelter of their shields, and then launched their own assault. Broken chunks of brick and petrol bombs flew towards the police. As more tear gas shells dropped in behind the protesters' front lines, the firefighter crews leapt into action. Some dropped the traffic cones over the shells and poured on water. Others swept in to scoop up the shells and threw them back over the barricades towards the police. Some aimed their throws over the walls of the adjacent PLA barrack building. One throw fell short, and a tear gas shell bounced off my helmet. "Sorry, sorry," came the shouted apology. Then from up on the bridge above us, someone cried out urgently, "Water cannon!" The police had been foreshadowing their recently commissioned water cannons for months, conducting public demonstrations for legislators and the media, and road testing them on the city's streets. The water cannons had made their first operational debut the previous week at a protest in Tsuen Wan, but were deployed then only to help clear debris from the roads. This would be the first time they were deployed against human targets. The crowd scattered. The water cannon's reputation had preceded it. Various protester infographics circulating online gave advice on how to handle the different elements of the police's offensive weaponry, from tear gas to pepper spray. The infographic on the water cannon had only one piece of advice: run. I ran with them, climbed up onto the overpass and looked down as some brave frontliners remained on the road and were buffeted by the water cannon. As the water cannon began to direct its stream up at the protesters and media on the bridge, I dropped further back. The spray was not just water, but a highly irritant form of pepper spray. The police not only directed the spray in powerful jets, they fired it up high into the air where it misted, forming a spreading cloud of droplets that drifted on the breeze. Those without gas masks coughed and choked as the pepper spray caught in their throats. From further back, I watched as bright blue plumes suddenly came shooting from the water cannon. Police had mixed the water with an indelible dye intended to mark protesters for later arrest. The blue clouds appeared almost festive, and there was an instinct to run towards them, arms outstretched. But then those hit by the dye came running back from the front line, their limbs and clothes soaked in blue. They smarted in pain and vainly scrubbed at their blue-tinged skin with alcohol wipes. The crowd fell back further down Harcourt Road and began clearing towards Admiralty as people in the crowd screamed out that the police were approaching from their headquarters in Wan Chai. A few frontline protesters built barricades facing that direction and began beating out their death rattle, the clang of bricks bashed against the traffic railings forming a tribal beat. From a footbridge above, I watched as the police approached from the far end of the road, and a small detachment of black-clad protesters made their way crouched along another traffic bridge that arched up and over the road from where the police were approaching. When they drew parallel to the police lines, they threw petrol bombs down onto the road in front of the police. The police retreated, letting off more volleys of tear gas back into Admiralty. Now the crowd retreated and I ran with them, through Admiralty and back into Wan Chai. Just past police headquarters, protesters began to build a large road barricade. From down the block there came a roar from the crowd and a slowly growing rumbling, screeching sound. As the roar of the crowd and the screeching approached, I saw that the protesters had appropriated a huge section of Steel Sports Stadium seating, ripped out of the Southhorn playground several blocks down, and were pushing it down the road to reinforce their barricade. Finally, the barricade, a mess of plastic road barriers, wooden pallets and metal sports ground seating, was doused in petrol and lit ablaze. Smoke billowed from the burning plastic. Over the heads of the crowd, the protesters' blue and green laser pointers cut through the smoke. By now the sun had set and the flames of the burning barricade danced and leapt against the night sky. The city was on fire.
This show is supported by you. My vision is to make the transformation of value into something that we can take with us into the future. If you want to help me grow this project, please consider making a donation either through my website or by tipping directly to the show's Bitcoin wallet, or otherwise pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. Now, if Hong Kong is a city of film, what would you say then to a double screening in an old cinema somewhere in Hong Kong's Kowloon district perhaps? Maybe director Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express, followed by the Hong Kong documentary filmmakers Inside the Red Brick Wall. Both films are as seditious as each other. One explores a kind of naive love story, subconsciously set to the tension and apprehension of a city ready to take flight prior to the 1997 handover from the British to the Chinese communists. The other explores the state's crackdown on young students born just as the handover was happening, coming of age in a city walled off from its past. This next reading was inspired by some of those young people, in fact, and it is from my own book, Fantasy City by the Harbour, published 2022, and I would like to think of it as a story of hope.
750 to Hong Kong, who are seated in row 59 or beyond, or now.
各位乘客，多謝你嘅耐心等候。國泰航空 CX-650 前往香港嘅航班現在開始登機。我哋現在邀請在位喺59航空之後嘅乘客開始登機。登機時請出示登機
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard this Cathay Pacific flight bound for Tokyo. Please make sure your tray table is put away and your seatbelt is fastened. Your seat should now be in the upright position as we prepare for takeoff. I rubbed my eyes with my fingers. That was about as far as I could get. I slammed down the cover on my laptop, stood up and went over to the window of my apartment. I leaned out and looked down at the intersection on Boundary Street. It had been raining heavily since yesterday when I had decided to lock myself in here. Even though the street below was packed with taxis and delivery trucks, it seemed a lot less noisy when it was raining. The row of shops underneath the tenement block on the other side were all mostly open, but the swarms of umbrellas that drifted by were uninterested in the water-soaked trinkets and clothes that were for sale. I had been trying to write a screenplay, but it was slow going. I had only produced a meagre few lines, with the rest stuck somewhere between my fingers and my brain. I had tried to do this exact same thing before and it had failed each time, but I promised myself somehow this story was going to be different. I thought it would be good to start it off in an airplane, to give it a sense of motion or something like that. I had it departing Hong Kong headed back to Tokyo, but it was not yet clear what the story was even going to be about. I felt about as clueless as one of those bystanders in the street that TV news crews accost to interview them about some heinous crime. All I knew about my story was that it was going to have something to do with Hong Kong, the city that I had called home for the last 4 years, but that I was soon to leave behind. The clactions of cars cut through the rain as a delivery truck held up one lane of traffic across the road. An old shopkeeper came out of the garment store and commanded the driver to unload the cardboard boxes inside the shop entrance. I flicked the switch on the electric jug in the kitchenette and made a cup of instant coffee. I tipped the Nestle jar upside down to get the last crystals out. I had been trying to use up all the things in my tiny one-room apartment, and so had ended up with an odd assortment of leftover items. I was not quite sure what I was going to do with it all. That was pathetic, really. The sum total of my life in Hong Kong amounted to no more than a small room of artifacts on the 4th floor of a dilapidated concrete tower. I don't know how others do it, but this was not a city for people like me. I was perpetually broke and fed up with people ripping off my stuff. I was tired of being shut out of publishing events and being out of work. I was tired of the apathy and the changes that were happening. I was fed up with the rich tossers who danced around and took selfies of themselves, eating crayfish and Admiralty or promoting their stupid fashion labels while the rest of Hong Kong slowly drowned. It was like they were leaving a relative in a nursing home to die alone while they were all out partying. And here I was, slamming my head against a wall as I tried to nut out a bittersweet love story about a place that I was never from and that I never belonged to. I didn't even know the first thing about writing a screenplay, so I could only take my cues from watching old Canto films as I dreamed about the day that they would turn my ramblings into a big screen flick. I had not told anybody I was getting ready to leave Hong Kong, but I had already made up my mind. Ever since the anti-extradition law protests had been squashed, my dreams of Hong Kong had been shattered to smithereens, just as if I had dropped my coffee mug out the window onto the stinking wet tarmac below. It was not safe here anymore. The protests had come and gone, and I had followed along in the entourage at first. It had started off with the hopes and dreams of a generation, and we had all been there, but by the end I knew deep down that we had fundamentally lost. It felt like we were all trying to swim across a vast ocean to escape something we could not even see. We had foolishly taken all our clothes and baggage in the water with us, and were now overburdened and exhausted and starting to sink. People had given up on doing what they knew to be right, and instead did what was practical and expedient, myself included. People had turned around to swim back to shore, while others had already succumbed to the water. I knew a guy, I would have called him a friend once upon a time, who had been anonymously reported to the police. Nobody had heard anything from him since. None of us said anything about it, but we all knew. I could only imagine what kind of dark place they had trucked him off to. I had been getting more and more paranoid about the whole thing, and I had been staying at home as much as I could. I wonder if they had seen my face when I had been at the rallies, or if I had been tagged in the web of snooping cameras posted all around the city. The only thing I could offer to the cause was my writing. If the police or whoever could make it through my screenplay, they might at least give me some constructive criticism before they locked me up in some Chinese prison camp and threw away the key, I thought as I smiled to myself stupidly. The delivery truck across the road finished unloading and left. I saw the shopkeeper frantically trying to stack away the cardboard boxes of merchandise. He battled against the heavy rain as he pulled in the boxes that were sitting exposed out on the street. There were so many boxes stacked up that he could not possibly hope to fit them all inside the tiny shop before they got ruined. The rain poured down in thick streams from the corners of the awning, and the wind blasted down the street in squalls that drenched everything. How long had he been running the store? He must surely know that every year the rainy season comes, that on days like this you can only shutter the store and wait it out. But here he was, fighting against the rain with an endearing kind of tenacity. I thought back to my story. I was really writing it for one person. She never knew me, but I knew her. Everyone knew her. She was the face of this whole movement. Back in the news from my country, they called her the goddess of democracy, which sounds so grandiose, but when you saw her speak, you could not help but feel a sense of profound beauty. She had been on the front lines, uniting the city against the unrelenting, dirty rain that beat down every day. What was I doing? I only hid myself behind my screen, writing these little stories. Could my words even make a difference? I took another look outside at the miserable weather coming in off the harbour as it screamed down the street in a wind tunnel between the tall buildings. These people must know that the rain cannot be stopped, but yet they still fight against it. The old shopkeeper was still wrangling with the merchandise, and, like a circus act, he somehow managed to stuff every last box inside his tiny clothes shop and get it out of the rain. He squatted in the entranceway with a cigarette hanging from his mouth as he stared blankly out into the crowds waiting for his next customer. I opened up my computer again and deleted the text I had been working on and rewrote it. My story was not about leaving this city behind anymore. It was supposed to begin here. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has switched on the seatbelt sign in preparation for landing. Please return to your seats and put away your tray tables and open the window shades as we begin our descent into Hong Kong.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. The music for this episode was provided by my good friend Simon James French. And if you would like to support this show, please consider making a donation either through my website or by tipping directly to the show's Bitcoin wallet. Finally, you can always email me at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you.